Hello, and welcome to Your Estate Matters, presented by Heritage Trust. Your Estate Matters is a podcast dedicated to everything estates, including building and preserving your legacy. If it's estate-related, we'll be talking about it. We're having the conversations today that will help Canadians protect their families, their assets, and their legacies tomorrow. Frank, thank you so much for joining us on Your Estate Matters. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've been super excited about this. I guess we've had a couple of false starts on here, so I'm so happy to be here, and this is a conversation that's really important to me. And it's not just about the money, which we'll find out today.
So we've known each other personally and professionally for years, and I've always been incredibly impressed with not just your financial acumen, but your humanity and your empathy and your very values first, and provide a real holistic approach to individuals and families. So I'm really excited to talk to you and hear about what some of your experiences are.
Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe tell us about your path. Like, how did you get from where you were? I understand you have an education degree, and then you built an extremely large and successful financial advising and investment management practice, and now you do sort of personal CFO and family office. Tell us about that trajectory.
Yeah, I guess like a lot of people my age, when I first began, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I actually started in biology and biochemistry. So I have my degree in that. So I have this analytic science side to me, but at a very early age, I started investing sort of about the age 14 or 15. That led to one thing or another. It was always a passion of mine. And as well, I taught for 1 year. My calling was definitely more entrepreneurial, and it called me out. And at that point, I began in this business more as, I guess, a traditional advisor, providing fee-only advice. So part of the early days, I guess I was one of the renaissance where I wanted people to pay me for my time and not sell products, which was very, very hard in the early days. So as that evolved into around the year 2000, I started getting bigger and bigger clients and more complexity. And at that time, that's when I would say I transitioned from a traditional advisory role into more of a personal CFO or family office. And really, it just sat down with two clients and I asked them, what is it they need and how can I best support them? And it just opened up all these new chapters on how I can provide advice and how we can serve them.
Tell me about, like, you've got a set of sort of core values or principles that you bring to your practice and families. Tell me about that and how that works.
Yeah, so we call them the 6 C's. So I like to keep things very simple. So compassion, collaboration, community, curiosity is definitely a big one for us, courage, and commitment. I might have missed one, which I tend to do. So I think that's really the essence of who we are as a group. It's really the people before numbers. It's really being curious with families and finding out what's most important to them, and not always being taking the first answer.
So what does that mean in practice? Like a family comes to you, maybe they've built some wealth, maybe they've got, investments or running businesses, maybe they've got complexity in their families. Like how does that values exercise interplay with what you do for them?
A great question. I think that starts right from the very first meeting and the very first phone call. And I think for some families, it's a bit of a surprise. I came to you about investments. I didn't come to you about all this other stuff. So for some families, it's a reframe right from the start. And for most families, it's very refreshing. That is, to get a chance to really find out their why, their purpose, the meaning behind money. Money is different things to different people. And I could probably have some fun with you, but we don't have the time, and find out what your money values are. So I think that's a big part. And that's something that evolves as the relationship evolves, right? Sometimes people need to feel safe. But I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to feel understood.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, money is a complex topic. We had a financial therapist on here one time, which was really interesting. But I think something at Heritage Trust is we help people protect their families, their assets, and their legacies. That's sort of our purpose and our why.
Yeah.
And, those are words, but what it means in practice is different for every individual and family. But unpacking where you want to go is as important than maybe just a spreadsheet or just a set budget if it's not connected to higher value or what your purpose is or where you're going.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So you spend your days inside the lives of like extremely successful families. What are the unspoken challenges, and what do you see with those families of what they're experiencing?
I think the biggest thing that we tend to see is the heaviest risks are on the emotional side of wealth, or the soft side of wealth, not the financial. It doesn't mean that families aren't optimized, they can't do things a little bit better, but for us, I think it's a lot of the unspoken things. Mm-hmm. It's really engaging families or next generations in conversations that they never had, and they don't know how to start. Mm-hmm. And part of that recent work is, I think I'd asked you out to that event we did with Dr. Moira Summers, is really to find the why behind wealth. And what is, wealth without meaning, I think is very empty. Mm-hmm. So as much as we do all the cognitive stuff, all the analytics, all my reflective thinking side, I think that's an important piece that families, for example, how do families do prenups? Mm-hmm. How do you start those conversations? A lot of folks sometimes in the legal industry, that can be scorched earth. Families never get back and never recover from those conversations. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, it's, wealth isn't always easier. Sometimes it gets more complicated with more wealth. Mm-hmm.
So I think unspoken to this is like the next generation. So I think sometimes the mistake that professionals make is, how do we convey wealth in the most tax efficient manner with like privacy? And I think the difficulty is sometimes technical professionals do incredibly complex trusts or tax driven planning, but they've never actually looked at the underlying structure of the family or what the goals are or what the idiosyncrasies are of the next generation. Like, how do you bring in that next generation and build wealth stewardship or get buy-in for what the goals are?
Wow. I think that could take the rest of the podcast. Mm-hmm. Nicole, that's a big question. So I think it really starts with engaging all the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. That's really the starting place. And that doesn't always work. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the parents don't want to engage with the next generation. They don't want to have the conversation, and it goes back the other way. Or, as you might know, if you have 3 kids in the family, 2 are fully engaged, 1's disengaged. And mm-hmm. sometimes that disengaged child can, run amok a good succession plan or a good estate plan. Mm-hmm. So I think really at the end of the day, it's about engagement. It's reaching out and it's starting those small conversations. Mm-hmm.
So you as an advisor, what does that look like in practice? Like, do you facilitate family meetings? Do you recommend education? Do you do sort of family charters? Like, what does that mean in practice?
I think for every family, it's a little bit different. We like to work with everyone in the family. So if we have a first gen that has a mom and a dad and there's 2 kids, very early on, we like to reach out and sort of begin a conversation. Usually that sort of starts out on the estate plan or some communication or sharing of values. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it evolves into a family meeting where we all hang out in the boardroom and we have some fun together, and sometimes it's a little less fun. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you have to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. So in summary, it's usually working with the next gen separately, one-on-one, so they have a safe place. Mm-hmm. It's not a two-way conversation. They need to know they feel safe and they have a chance to voice what's important to them. So sometimes we'll also have team members that are, let's say, millennials. So they're not sitting down with somebody that's like mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And I think that really helps ease the conversation. And you have to look at this as a multi-year conversation.
Mm-hmm. So what does success look like? How do you know that a family's done it well?
I think the families that really thrive are the families that communicate and the families that have a plan. So it's really intentional. Mm-hmm. And they have a purpose. I I think it's also something that tends to evolve, like I said, over time. Um, and for a lot of our families, just they feel like they never got it figured out. But when you look back over 3, 5, 10, or 15 years, the progress they've made is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. So let's get practical. What does a personal CFO mean for a busy family or a founder or the wealth generator? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I can take two sides to that. The first thing I would say is a personal CFO is really somebody that stands at the center of your whole financial life. Mm-hmm. Somebody who can see the whole map, just not the territories and the provinces, if we use Canada as an analogy. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks in our industry and our profession work in silos. So the accountants will work with the client, the lawyers will work with the client, the financial advisor will work with the client, the insurance agent will work with the client, but nobody steps back and see how it all works together through a plan. So I would say that, we stand at the center mm-hmm. of clients' financial life and also the heart. Mm-hmm. So like I said, we want to get really clear about what's most important and what their biggest challenges are.
Mm-hmm. So a family starts working with you. What changes? Like, what does it feel like when someone works with you and say they're a year in? What would they notice?
The first thing they notice is they can breathe. They finally have a place where, I guess in my language, they've never really understood where they stand in relationship with all their goals, or more importantly, they've never even had written goals mm-hmm. And a plan. So I think that through that clarity, that builds confidence, and confidence that builds a peace of mind. Mm-hmm. So I think really at the end of the day, it's an emotional shift more than a financial shift.
Mm-hmm. So, I know a little bit about your practice. You've got founders, you have physicians, yeah. And my experience with working with physicians is like highly intelligent people, often blind spots or avoidance around money. Like, what does that look like for you when you've got these clients?
Yeah, so I don't work as much anymore, but I started my whole career, and it was pretty simple. I have a Bachelor of Science degree. I have a biochem background, so these are my people, mm-hmm. right? So, but I would say that the first thing that they all have in common is they're all time-starved, mm-hmm. right? And time-starved people, it's just, it's like table scraps. They're just, going from one thing to the next.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, it's important to kind of, put everything on a table, have a systems view of everything. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they want their time back. They mm-hmm. want to do what's most important. Mm-hmm. They're scared of these things. They're mm-hmm. an expert in their own history. And we do also have financial professionals that are a bit do-it-yourself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes their eyes get open a little wider, that there's more things than they were thinking that they need to look at or address.
Like, what about that driver founder personality, like yeah. the wealth creators? Like, they often have incredible skills that have like built an enormous amount of wealth, but they're often a little bit autocratic or, not the most collaborative individuals. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, maybe I can share a story. A story might be good. So, we have a process that we have most families sit down called financial DNA, and you might recall that back in our early days. And this is to help us accelerate and really understand who it is we're working with, how they see the world, how they communicate, how they make decisions, how they think of risk. And I would say a lot of these drivers or entrepreneurs might have a little bit of ADHD, mm-hmm. right? And they create a big wake. Mm-hmm. So there's nobody really behind them that's sort of managing the wake, so to speak. It takes a little bit of time to earn their trust. Mm-hmm. But again, these are the people that could benefit most from a little bit of structure, mm-hmm. A little bit of pre-planning, some proactivity, somebody that corrals the troops and all the professionals, but also holds them accountable to the things that are most important. And sometimes some of these individuals in the past have never really had any accountability. And you have to do that with love and a little bit of care. But that's how we show up.
Mm-hmm. So what's your example? You're going to tell us a story.
The example I might share is, maybe around the year 2005, was introduced to this family by a friend and said, this is somebody that is actually a family office client that was one of their best friends and a golfing friend of theirs. And they said, I really think, and I'm using the analogy, Bob really needs to sit down with you. Well, why is that? I said, well, super successful entrepreneur, fantastic at creating things, but not very good at managing things. So that relationship started off where everything was closed-chested, didn't really want to let me see the whole map, just wanted to sort of, piecemeal. And as we got through that relationship in about six months, 8 months, I kind of got to the place and said, well, if this client's not going to open up and not going to allow us to see the whole picture, it's probably not a really good fit. And sort of shared to them. And that was a tough conversation to have. I was still pretty young. This would have been one of my biggest clients at the time. And just sort of shared, I don't think this is a fit. And this is why it's not a fit. And that was the first time I guess I got to use one of our C's, which is courage, to help families. So at the end of the day, we need to be courageous and loyal champions for clients and their family. And at the end of the day, if they're not willing to be courageous for themselves, then they're probably not a fit for us either. And this individual had built up 6 businesses. They had tons of venture capital, tons of private equity. Fast forward a couple of years, the great financial crisis comes. This whole business is now turned upside down. There's no liquidity. All the venture capital was illiquid. So now they were in a real mess. If they had not have sat down with it at that time, they wouldn't have had that $10, $15 million of liquidity and would have lost 2 of their businesses or half their wealth.
So you basically said this isn't a fit, and then they decided to be more open kimono. Like, what happened?
It wasn't more open kimono. It was totally dark and no communication vacuum for about 2 months. And then I can't recall exactly what had happened, but it started with an email communication that led to another meeting, and essentially a reset on the relationship. And I think it was the most powerful reset that, if I think back over 20 years, the impact of that family, the 2 kids, one has mental health issues, the other one doesn't have a very good relationship with the mom and the dad. Now, if I look back today in 20 years, that family is thriving.
That's wonderful. So let's talk about the logistics. So how do we coordinate the rest of the team? So you talked about the fact that professionals often work in silos. So you've got tax, legal, insurance, investment strategy. Like, how do you quarterback those individuals so they're rowing in the same direction?
The very first part is to engage with each of the professionals in a way that helps everybody understand that we're not here to take any part of their job. We're not here controlling the process. We're all standing on the same side of the table as the client to support them in their best interests. I use the analogy a lot of times with accountants that we're your foot shoulders. We may see the client more often. We may have more information. That doesn't mean that your part isn't the most important part. The tax part is a big part of clients' planning. So I think including people and helping them see that, we're not there to take over their job, and that 1 + 1 = 3. And if we include the client in that, 1 + 1 + 1 = 6. The second part of that is having a structure where everybody can kind of see the whole picture. So that's where my technology or systems thinking and ability, exchanging information, collaborating if they want the latest client goals, they want access to the financial plan, if they want to understand proactively how the portfolio and distributions are going to affect the tax plan next year, that we map out a client service plan for those professionals. It's not often, it's very rare, in fact, if I look back, that we get all the stakeholders around the table. But there's these micro conversations that go on throughout the year.
And so would you think of yourself as like center of the wheel with the spokes, or how does that work?
You might recall that's one of my favorite ways to so if you look at a personal CFO, and I'll be hesitant to use the word family office, because I think as much as we might say, we're a family office light, and unless you're a single family that has 3 full-time salaried people, that's a family office where there's 100% alignment, you're paying the bills, versus a multifamily office or something like we do, where we provide some of these services for, 24 families. But really, if we look at the spokes of the wheel, there's 3 or 4 that we do very, very well. The accountants might do a couple, the insurance agent might do 1 or 2, the estate M&A lawyer, etc. The teams can be quite broad, and the multitude of our clients, if they don't have an executive assistant or somebody in their business, we will hire them because that is almost or even more critical than the piece that we provide. Who's making sure that things don't slip through the cracks?
And so does that assistant report to the family unit or the business unit, or?
A lot of times it's both.
Okay.
And for the most part, it's hired through the business.
Okay.
But a whole big conversation is this, what do you do when the business is sold? And that's a whole nother host of issues. They have all this infrastructure, all these people that ran the operation. So what do you do now when you sell your business for $150 million and you've lost your whole team and you've lost your identity? So that's a whole nother conversation.
And is that when you see people setting up family offices and things
that
like
tends to be when they're more open to that. I think if I go back 20 years ago, that was new language. People didn't even know what that meant. If we look back the last 5 years, you're seeing more of those things. They might understand a personal CFO a little bit better than a family office, but every family is unique. So one family might require 15 or 16 services. One family might need 3 and have a very simple life.
One thing I've noticed in the industry is the family office word has become really diluted because it's been used as this sort of marketing lingo, arguably, that people are using to sell products. And so I think if we think like, what is a family office? I think it's unique to every individual, but it's basically like the family chooses to consolidate wealth. Like if you've got the golden goose that's laying eggs, I think the idea is, do you want to keep the goose together or do you want to cut up the goose into disparate parts? And I think if a family wants to remain cohesive continuity, they're going to have some sort of family office structure. And that's, usually a financial person, sometimes legal, an administrative person. And then as the bigger the wealth or the complexity of the family, you can add services. I know at Heritage Trust, we do have some family office clients in it, but I do sort of recoil at the word that it sounds overly fancy or ambiguous. But like sometimes it's just like arguably bookkeeping, like it's not sexy.
Bill payment.
Yeah.
It's the simple things.
But I mean, it can include a lot of things. Like, so it really depends on the amount of wealth, the complexity of the family, and how much consolidation they want, or whether they want to go their own ways. And it's funny, they've got that shirt sleeves data where the majority of businesses don't successfully transition. But I think the question is, well, is that really success anyway? Because if you're transferring wealth, it could be the net sale proceeds of the business. And if you're building stewardship in each of the Gen 2 or Gen 3 are doing their own successful things, maybe that is success. You don't necessarily have to stay together.
Absolutely.
It depends what the family wants and what.
Absolutely. I think you brought up two really important parts there, Nicole, is, and if I'm fully objective and fully honest, we do provide services and we are paid through investments. We also have fixed fee arrangements for some families that we don't manage the assets for, but there's a lot of product sales,
right?
Whether it's through insurance, investment management. So I'm also very hesitant to use the word. I think it's become highly dilutive, which comes back to the personal CFO piece, right? And another part I might add to this, if I may, is I call it the CPO. It's the Chief Problem Solving Officer. So a lot of times we see in families, whether it's mental health, the services we provide or I provide around health because it's my passion about engaging private medical services, concierge services around the world. I might take up 2 days a month solving those problems or helping a child that has mental health issues find the appropriate services or professionals. So really when you say personal CFO, you might look at the left side, but there's this whole that right family side. What are the most important problems pressing that family? And that's more important than the rate of return or anything else, right?
So let's talk about, you've got a business owning family. What is a successful transition? Is it transitioning the business? Is it exiting and transitioning wealth? Like, tell me about that.
Succession and transition, you're talking about two distinct issues. So if I kind of not pull us back too much to that right brain again, but your individual transition of selling a business, the majority of our founders' identity is tied into that business, their daily structure, their sense of control, their willingness or unwillingness to address those issues can be a really big roadblock. So I think for the most part, it's this willingness to address some of those issues. Because historically what we found is, there's two times, and I'll turn this question back to you. So when do we tend to see a higher risk of divorce? When the kids leave the house. So first 7 years, kids leave the house, or when you sell a business. Because when the husband and wife comes home and they were the founder, they want to boss around their spouse. They have no daily structure. Things become very tense. They go, I haven't seen you for 35 years. So maybe I'll turn that back to you. What are the things that you see, in that that are...
I think it can often be subconscious. I'm thinking of one individual we're working with right now who is in their early 70s, has run a successful business for 40 years, has built a lot of personal wealth as well. And the person says that they want to exit, but every time a prospective purchaser approaches them and they get close to the finish line, there's a reason why it can't work. Right?
It's called sabotage.
Right. So I think there's a subconscious, I don't even think it is conscious.
Yeah.
But I think this person says on one hand, oh, I'm working too hard. This is so stressful. I want to spend time with my spouse. What's the point of building all this wealth if I never get to enjoy it? Time is finite. I'm in my early 70s.
Right.
I'm getting up at 4:00 in the morning to work on this stuff. This isn't sustainable. This is real. But then very valid prospective purchaser, well, I can't do that. Well, no, absolutely not. There's no way I'm going to agree to that. And it's like clearly there's some sort of dissonance between what is being said and then what is happening for them personally.
The heart and brain aren't aligned.
Yeah. So I think in that individual, the other thing about that driver founder is they're not often the most reflective people. And, they didn't grow up where people went to therapy or talked about their feelings or,
No.
So it's funny with this individual, I will email them questions and I will get one word answers. No. They're trying to communicate. So it's a little bit of a stereotype. And that's when there's people like us that are technical advisors, and we go to school for years. We spend years becoming competent technically, and that's really important. But what in practice it seems like 90% of our success is something often we've never been trained in, which is like understanding the human experience and dealing with the soft piece and the EQ. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to be successful in servicing this client unless I can get in touch with that. And, for me, I've been a lawyer for 25 years. I have, undergrad law degree, master's of law. Nobody said one word about how to manage
being a coach or a counselor.
Somebody who's having developmental life barriers and doesn't want to talk about them and stuff like that. So it is a very interesting, fascinating piece. And I enjoy working with people like you and multidisciplinary teams to do the technical piece, but then also get underlying what's going on for that family. And, it's one thing I can talk about, like Emily Griffiths is a speaker and has written books, and we can talk about her because she speaks very openly about this, but how succession doesn't work. So She talked about her father, who was this incredible entrepreneur, and built all this wealth and had beautiful, beautiful technical planning, but the family wasn't necessarily on board, and there was sort of 2 older kids and 2 younger children, and because there was a big age difference, they had really different life experiences, and a lot of the beautiful planning got really undone basically because there wasn't buy-in from the family and they had really different goals. And she speaks about her own family, where they are actually saying no to technical complexity and really focusing on building wealth stewardship, entrepreneurial stuff for the next generation, but not trying to be too technical and tax based and more of the human part. She talks about something called a family bank. Anyway, we can talk
Well,
about that.
I think if I were to distill that down to one word, it's alignment.
Right.
Right. And the best laid plans, if there's no alignment, don't happen. And the majority of the clients that we've actually brought on, I'm helping those families 3 to 5 years prior to selling the business. That's where we can add the most value, help them to get across that finish line, getting prepared mentally, financially, and emotionally for that big decision. Standing around the table when the going gets tough and they're fighting for the last $10 million, and they know it doesn't make any difference if you get 100 million or 90 million. It's just a scorecard. But if you don't close the deal, you don't get it done then, it might be 7 years till you get another chance based on economic cycle, or the business just disappears.
Yeah, you might lose the window.
Right.
So I think the statistic is the majority of Canadian employment and GDP is small to medium-sized business. The majority of these businesses are family-owned and are going to transition in the next 10 years with the aging of the baby boom. And I think like nobody's planned. So like, what do we do about that? How do we communicate with people better?
Yeah, and it's interesting. You and I probably see the same stats. I felt like we had that conversation 10 years ago, and 90% of those families have just moved the needle another 10 years and still haven't dealt with it. So it's interesting.
Well, people, I guess, are living longer, so they can, they can defer
absolutely.
Okay, so let's just talk about risk management. Let's get a little bit more technical. Like, you've got a family that comes to you. How do you assess risk, and what are some of the strategies you do? I mean, we're in a highly volatile, uncertain, and fast-changing time. How do you help families deal with that?
Yeah. I wouldn't say risk is a 4-letter word, if I can start off with that. And what I mean by that is when you think of risk, you have to look at human capital risk, right? And that's just not your intellectual capital and do you have all your eggs in one basket called a business. That business disappears. You've worked your whole 50 years in that business and you don't have enough financial assets. So that's a huge risk. So concentration's a big risk. But there's many other types of risks that concentration is a big one. So people that tend to have been successful in real estate as a perfect example. So I can think of like a half dozen families that have built up, north of $100 million in real estate. And that was extraordinarily successful for 30, 40 years when interest rates were low, cap rates were different. You fast forward the last 5 years, it's been a bit of a disaster for families. So, they might think that they're diversified as well. So for example, here's a great example. So an entrepreneur sold their business for $85 million. They netted out about $70 million in tax. Prior to calling us, they found 4 financial advisors. Each of those advisors got a quarter. And when I looked under the hood and looked at the portfolio, they had expensive diversification. They owned a lot of the same stuff. It truly wasn't diversified. It wasn't built to weather the storms that are coming or occur on occasion. And the clients were paying 3 or 4 times more in fees than they should have probably been paying. So, risk comes from so many different levels.
So I don't want to throw out something I haven't prepared you for, but how are we managing risk? Like there are some people that are saying AI is going to, if we ever get to AGI, like artificial general intelligence, and there's wildly different predictions about whether that's going to happen and what the time frame is, but the economic disruption and enormous potential job loss and huge changes in our economy, like how nobody knows what's going to happen, but I think we all know there's going to be enormous change. Like, how are you helping people navigate that?
It's a very small question. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. The future's unknowable. I don't know the future. No one knows the future. So you have to start with that premise. Second of all, technological change. We can look back through history. There's industrial revolution. There's farming. The biggest shift that I can think that was more slower motion that draws some parallels to today is if you look in the United States of America, just under 20% of people were involved in farming and agriculture. You look back today and it's less than 1%. So you get these huge shifts in the underlying sectors or parts that are driving the economy. I think this is going to be a faster change. So how will governments adapt? I think capital markets are quite efficient at how they allocate capital. So I think that'll happen in real time. But as a society, I think we're going to have to be dealing with some bigger issues. Do we have universal funding of hundreds of thousands of people in Canada that lost their job, that can't replace it based on training and other things? So I think we're in a situation where, broad diversification is extraordinarily impossible. You can't always think that, hey, put all your money in equities and it's going to work out, or hey, let's concentrate all our money in AI stocks. And I could start a whole nother conversation about the risk with that. And one of the most dangerous words in finance is this time it's different, because usually history rhymes. So, does this lead into something where the benefits don't quite come true? Those stocks are repriced and they're worth 2/3 or 3/4 of their value. Is there another debt crisis coming? So diversification, owning bonds, fixed income, other asset classes, and not just concentrated to the winners or what's doing well now, I think is really important.
But how are you advising people when there's really like 10 companies that are carrying the market? Like, what do you say to people in terms of diversifying?
Diversification is always your friend, right? So I could go back and show you a composite of 100 years. And in the year 1900, the U.S. stock market composed 15% of the world market capitalization. Great Britain was 24%. Fast forward to 1950, the United States is at similar levels, 65%. Fast forward to 1970. To 1989, the United States goes from a capitalization of 65% to 26%, and Japan took over the world. So just because U.S. has been this success story, I think it provides a bias. It doesn't give an accurate window into the future for expected returns. So valuations matter. The cost of capital is the expected return. And right now, U.S. stocks cost of capital is extraordinarily low. And that usually means unusually low rate of returns going forward.
One more not easy question.
Yeah.
Like Kuzma's coming up, Trump's saying wants to try to turf the deal. We've got incredible competition from China. Like, is Canada in decline? What's going to happen to our standard of living? We can't get projects done. Our standard of living and productivity is plummeting. What's going to happen to Canada?
You're really throwing the easy questions out here today, Nicole. Again, I don't know if I can answer that, but I can use the past as an example. So if you go back to the early 90s in Canada, we were a bit of a disaster, right? The amount of debt, highest to GDP. Our currency was getting crushed. Bond markets were asking for higher yields based on the risk. Fast forward what happened over the next 10 years. Canada was one of the lowest debt to GDP. We brought this thing called GST, very unpopular. It was supposed to be a temporary. It's still here today. Economies adapt. People adapt. Maybe Mark Carney is part of the answer here. This productivity in Canada has been an absolute disaster, how we reinvest or lack of reinvestment in the economy over the last 10 years or 15 years. And I won't shift my political view on that, but it's been an unmedicated disaster. So again, you can't look at the past and say that's the expectation of the future, because capital markets will enforce discipline. Capital markets will enforce change. The cost of capital will increase, bond rates will increase, and that'll cause governments to make change. There's three ways you can grow out of a debt crisis, right? The first one is you can grow your way out. That tends to be the most popular. The second one's austerity. I don't think there's any will of Canadians or US for that. And the third one is some level of debasement of currency. And maybe that's the future for the United States, but I think it's pretty unlikely.
Are you buying gold?
I do not own gold, but within my portfolio, I probably have a 2 to 4% allocation to gold mining companies. Gold as an asset class, I think does have some merits as an inflation hedge, but it's a highly volatile way to protect against inflation. Mm-hmm. Gold's been an extraordinarily hot investment the last 18 months. But if we look back over 50 or 70 years, gold's expected return is inflation. And what happens is you tend to have a hot run up in returns in a short period of 2 to 3 years, and then it does nothing for 20.
So if you could give Canadian families like one step that they could do, before the end of 2025 or Q1 26, what is one thing that they can do to move themselves forward financially?
This gets back to the conversation piece, which I think is a big one. So hold a 30-minute family future conversation, right? Start with the small conversations. Find some way to engage your kids or your kids to engage your mom and dad. That's been a big thing that I see as different. Today's generation is very different than we might have been. If you look back 34 years, you might say that they're entitled, they're not engaged, but at the end of the day, they want to inherit wisdom. They don't want to inherit the money.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. Thank you so much, Frank, for spending time with us.
Absolutely. Been a pleasure to be here.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered individual legal, financial, or tax advice. Make sure to consult the advisor of your choice to advise you on your own circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Estate Matters. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow it on your podcast platform of choice. Whether you're planning your own estate or you're acting as executor for somebody else's, Heritage Trust can help. Partner with Heritage Trust to protect your family, your assets, and your legacy. If you'd like more information about Heritage Trust, please visit our website at heritagetrustcompany.ca. This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.